Okay, cool. Yeah. So good evening, everyone again. And yeah, I think most of us already know about this webinar series, but I'll just repeat in case somebody is joining for the first time. So this webinar is related to Glific, which is an open source project built in Elixir and React, and helps NGOs to communicate with their beneficiaries via WhatsApp APIs. So, and we are building this project from last 1 year, and we recently released the first one. I mean, the first stable release 1.0. And yeah, so since it has, since it's reached out a milestone, we thought that now a lot of people will come up, and we are expecting to a lot of people to come up and help us to build this project and build the community. So in the same agenda, we started this web series where I talk about all the various Glyphic tech component, and show you how we build that, how we structure the things, which will help you to start contributing in this project. And so in the same row today, we will discuss about the GraphQL thing, how we structure the GraphQL in Glyphic, and how we are maintaining it in scalable way. So let's start. So yeah, so isn't today's agenda is what is GraphQL. So mm, and since you are, I'm expecting that you know already about GraphQL, but in case you doesn't know, we'll talk about it in the next slide. Next is how it's different from the REST API, and then we'll talk about how we structure in this in Glyphic, and what are the opportunities or things we didn't did in project, and you can take it forward from there. So the first thing is what is GraphQL. So I think you all know what is the REST API. REST APIs has multiple endpoints where you make a call and it authenticates you and gives you the data based on the function written, based on the resolver written for that API endpoint, right? And so that was fine for a lot of use cases, and that really works good. But the only drawback is that we can't be explicit about the returning response. What I mean is that you have to decide what response you need to send on a developer side, not the API consumer side. And that's where the drawback. So in case I don't need that much data to load, or I have a huge volume and I just want to load the specific data to reduce my payload, I can't do that with the REST API. If you will do that, you have to write more endpoints, and yeah, that's not logical, or that's not maintainable for that perspective. So that's where GraphQL comes up, and GraphQL is built by Facebook. What it does, it allow consumer API consumers to demand the data, and whatever data they want, they can access from a single API endpoint. So yeah, so if I talk about, so in REST API there are multiple endpoints, and you can get the data from on those different. In GraphQL there is just one API endpoint, which is a post API, and you can send with on that query some of the extra parameters, and that parameter will be resolved by GraphQL server, and they will make some DB, make some computation and everything on the database, and give you the response whatever in way you want. So that's the basic functionality. So let's say, so yeah, and it works since it's built on the REST API. You can work as a normal API endpoint with any platform. So yeah, so if you see in this picture, there are three clients which call the GraphQL server. GraphQL just talk to the DB and get the data. It fracturize the data. I mean, it make the components of the data and return the response based on your request. So if I, so this is a sample thing. So let's say if you are in a for this use case, you want a certain post and followers for a user, right? So if there is an API endpoint or REST API endpoint, what you need to do, you have to fetch all the data. So if you make a query get post details, in that case you will get the name, the first name, last name, all the user attribute. Plus if you want to access the post, then the title, the and every other attribute which is enabled by the system, by the server, and same for the followers. But in GraphQL, what happens is you just make a single post call, and you demand the data. Okay, I need only name for the user, and I also need association with the post. But in post, I just need a title. So let's say if you are in a mobile application, you are using the GraphQL things, you can just demand that much data and the follower name. And yeah, apart from that, you can also put the limit and everything there, as much as your server allowed, and you will respond that data. In case you are on your desktop or somewhere else where you want to show more data, like last updated or contributed by or things like that, you can again just update your query parameters. You can just ask to post to give you the title and the and the summary also, let's say. So you just need to add one more field here with your desktop application field, and it will again talk to the GraphQL, no code changes, nothing else, and you will get the data on demand. So that's a main use case or main benefit of GraphQL. And yeah, so so I mean the REST API, if I compare, you can read about more how to what is good and what is bad on REST API and GraphQL things. But yeah, it's totally depend on use case. But for me, I think GraphQL makes more sense, since nowadays we are consuming single APIs for all our different clients. So that's the main use case of GraphQL. In case you have more question, we can talk about them later. But that's the premise of GraphQL and REST API. Now, the next thing I want to talk about. So these some of them are GraphQL terminologies, but and I'll try to show you in a simplified way. But yeah, you can read about more on these things on the internet. So in Glific, so we have a front end application, and other engines are also accessing our system. What we do is we just receive the request. We build a schema. Schema is a place where you define all your where you expose all your queries. You define, okay, user can make these queries, and these parameters are required, and something like that. Once you get the request on schema makes just a function call. Schema always talk to the resolvers, and resolver will just take all the attribute, all the request parameters in that, and they decide, okay, now they decide what is the context here, like a controllers. So now resolver talk to controllers or context that, okay, compute this thing, and I need this data for a specific format. Now context work on that, compute that, and perform all those operations, get that data from DB, and return the response back to resolvers. And same happens in the schema, and then you get the response back. So that's the main workflow in Glific, how we structured. So if I just share my screen, I'll move to the code now, and I'll show you some of the files or some of the directory structure, how we are doing that. So I'm on my VS Code screen now. And if you see that in Phoenix, we have controllers, we have router, which route the application. So you always have an API endpoint called /API, which is
Pankaj,
API protected.
you're speaking away from mic, so it's very difficult to hear. You can pull the mic towards yourself if you want.
Is it fine now?
Yeah, you can pull the mic towards yourself if you want.
Okay. Yeah. So now I'm on my ID, and I'll show you the directory structure. So let me just do bit increase the font size, and yeah. So this is a router file in Phoenix. So all like all the other framework, Phoenix has a router thing. And in the routers, you just make a single API endpoint, which is called API. API and all the front end just need to call this thing, and which is API protected. So you have to be authenticated while calling this API. So this is a REST thing. You just need to make a REST call on this API with some specific parameter or in a request data in a specific format. Now what happens is when the call comes on this API endpoint, we move that to schema called Glific schema. And if I go there, so this is the Glific schema file where we just import all our queries. So let's say if I talk about the contact types, so we created a directory in our Glific web thing and with name schema, and where we define all our resources as a GraphQL API endpoint. So if you see that, so if I go to contact types, I decided what queries are allowed and what objects are. So I'll just go to the query part here. So let's say the contact queries. And now the first query is the contact, right? Another which will give you the where you can access the ID. You just give us the ID as an argument, and we will resolve that and give you the all the contact information. And another thing, another API endpoint is contacts for getting a multiple contacts in list based on the filter and ops. Yeah. Another one is so same API endpoint. I mean the contact location and everywhere. But the main thing is that you can access, you can filter out all these data, all these API, and I mean for contact you can access all these attributes. So in case you want, let's say only ID and name for your mobile application, you can just request for that. And in case you want some more data like status, opt-in time, but it's totally up to the client what they want to fetch from, what they want us to send them as a payload. So but these are the fields. Apart from these fields, they won't be able to access any other fields. There's a layer, security layer between DBN and the GraphQL. So we provide we define what data point are exposed to the user. So that's the query part. Now GraphQL also helps to make the to mutate the database, and that's where the mutations comes in, where you can create the contact by GraphQL, where we ask for a input in a specific manner, in a specific format. So if I just show you that we ask you to give us an input variable, and input variable will consist this object, the contact input. So if I show you the contact input here, yeah. So we created an input, contact input. So you need to give us these fields uh, and uh, and to create the contact. So that's how you make the that's how we structure the types, our types. All these types are, if you see that there is a authentication mechanism for different kind of roles, but all these types are calling the resolvers. So I'm in the schema directory right now, and all these schema files will call, schema will always call the resolvers, and then resolver you will see the same kind of resources. So in schema contact type, I'll just always call the contact resolver. In resolver, so if I need to see the contact, I'll get the data. These are the functional programming thing. You can do the pattern matching and all kind of things. And I receive all the data, the current user by authentication token, the context, and so for to fetch the contact information, I just need ID basically and the user information. So now what I'll do is I called my repo context. Here I can do more context. Let's say I created, for now, it's just a simple query. I just call my repo context and call fetch by and give you the data from the DB. And I just fetch all the data. Now my schema will decide what data you ask and how it will be transferred to back while sending it back. Again, for the contacts, I just call my contact list. It's as I said, it's like a controller thing, and you just call a function with all the argument you receive in the GraphQL, like filter operations and the limit and offset and everything, and it will give you the data. So the resolver work is just to receive the data from schema and to send the data to context, and whatever response comes up, just sending in this format to back to the schema. Now, if I think I have shown you already the context thing, what is the context in Phoenix and how we wrote, but yeah, that's how the context are written. And if I show you the list context, is just do again the repo, it call the repo functions, it add permissions if you are allowed or not to access the user, and then sends the data back. So all these small unit of functions just interact with the some of the other functions and interact with the DB and give the data back to the resolvers, and then resolver back give this data back to the schema. So that's how the GraphQL is working in Glific. Apart from that, there are some more tips, like we created some generic types. So GraphQL by default, the plugin we are using is allowed like the integer, string, and all those kind of data type for type checking. We also added one more file called generic types, where we can define our own data types. Like if you want, if you will send, you can send us as the variable ops, which always have these fields, and we can just make a query to the DB. So that's where I really like GraphQL to make it, it really structured and give you the power to write your own API endpoints and structure context. So same for the GID. So GraphQL give us the ID, which is an integer, but we need some ID which is a string, and but in a string format, but it should be integer. So that's where we created new and a new and data point, which is called GID. And yeah, on the same perspective, we also add JSON and these kind of things. So generic type is different. All other are resources types. And if you see that I created, so this is my contact types here, and I'll just call in schema. I'll just import this file, and this is the main file where we are importing everything, all the queries, all the mutations, and all the subscriptions. And now once this schema module is set up with all these queries and everything, we can just call this schema separate in our router. So that's how the complete GraphQL works. And in Glific, basically, that's the one way we found out to make it scalable. There are multiple ways people used to do. I mean, the resolvers and the context in a separate directory, but in a same file, but in a different module. And some people make authentication on a top level, don't do that in a particular query or mutation level. So there are multiple approaches to structure the GraphQL in your Phoenix application, but that's how we went about it, and this is helping us quite nicely. So now I'll move back to my screen share, my slide, and yeah. So as I talk about that, yeah. So for, again, I'll just repeat to make you understand that if I request comes in schema, then went to resolver, then context, and then back to the schema and send it to the client. So that's the thing we did so far. And the next thing sorry. The, so in agenda, we talked about GraphQL, the REST API, how we structure the GraphQL, and the last is the opportunities to start contributing. So we worked on it, and it's quite nicely. But the thing we are still missing is the testing part. So we didn't write a test case for the subscription thing, and that give us some challenges in a bit for some of the API calls. So that is the part is missing. We also want to structure some of the generic types we want to create, but somehow we didn't get time to finish that off as well. So we are still looking at it and finding it more ways to do that. But if you ask me right now, the testing GraphQL APIs and testing the subscription and everything is pretty much important, and we are trying to get time to work on that. So yeah, I think that's it from today's discussion. And if you have any question, you can talk to me right now, or you can write me on pankaj@colletcow.com. Thank you.
So GraphQL, Pankaj, we can go about in any language, or are they, we need to have some additional extra support to write GraphQL. So so it's is it architectural thing, or is it, is it a language thing? How do you divide it?
So all the language supports GraphQL. I mean, but yeah, it's a architectural thing. I mean, you can just didn't go in PHP and do it your way. But there are a lot of packages in every language which supports the GraphQL structure and to resolve the request and resolve the response for the user. So all our packages are available who works like a middleware, who receive the application on an API endpoint, ask you to give them the data in a specific format, and then do the manipulation and send back to the data to the user. So yeah.
And authentication, when we talk about authentication, so it's the same thing that we have for REST authentication, or it's a different kind of authentication?
In Glific, it's the same thing. We extract the authenticated user by token. So and that's where we also use the REST API in Glific. So to log in and everything, we allow you to make a REST API call so that NGO or anybody else didn't do much work. So you just send us a simple login query with email and password. We'll give you a token, and based on that token, you can make all the queries in Glific.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that's
So
it.
Pankaj, what are the disadvantages that you think, that you faced like while using GraphQL versus the REST API?
I don't think so any disadvantage, but sometimes I feel the control is to the user, or I feel I mean, I didn't find any use case where if we use GraphQL and that will have, but just like I said, for login, we use REST API. So we didn't see many. So like for login and everything, we are using a plugin called some package which doesn't support the GraphQL way to retrieve the token and everything. So that's where that's and it by default work on the REST API. So those are the limitation. I mean, REST API is quite old and quite mature. So you will find a lot of things with that, a lot of package, lot of support with that. But GraphQL is new. It's taking shape now. But I think that is the only thing. But apart from that, I am not sure what are the disadvantage of GraphQL.
Okay, so Pankaj, moving forward, like if a new budget comes to you, so you will start with the REST API, or you will say I will prefer GraphQL in that case.
Um, Again, I mean, it will depend on the use case and the client structure. But I think I'll see. My first choice will be the GraphQL for the packages. If that language has those packages and support those kind of things quite nicely. So
Okay.
like in this one, Absinthe is a quite popular library and people are using it a lot. So there was no issue with that. And okay, now I can, there is one more thing. The structure is not defined yet. I mean, you can structure like React Native or all other packages. There is no defined structure for GraphQL also. So you can define your own structure. You can put your own directory things here and there. And so that's the only, also again, the new thing. I mean, it's a new, so there is no defined areas and that kind of things.
And Pankaj, you mentioned about GraphQL subscription and you elaborated on querying and mutation. Can you also share about what GraphQL subscription is and what's its use case in an application?
So yeah, I mean, all the GraphQL queries and mutations are on a HTTP call, basically. But the GraphQL subscription are WebSocket call. So it's a different protocol. So it makes a connection between the client and so for in Glific we are using the subscription for our chat application, and that's where so in a nutshell I'll again say that both the other things are HTTP things and the WebSocket is a WSS call. So that's the main agenda, to make the connection, and so that you don't need to refresh your browser to get the data, to poll the data. You don't need to do all these things. You can just subscribe our Glific system and yeah, receive the data.
Okay, so you mean when you receive a new message, you don't need to refresh the page. It will just give a notification through a WebSocket.
Exactly. Yeah. In case you want to update your BSP balance and all kind of things, you don't need to refresh your page again and again. All right. So yeah, I think that's it for today. Thanks for joining. I'll see you in next webinar, where we'll talk about how we are leveraging the flow editor and making a lot of NGOs' life easier by building flow in WhatsApp, for the WhatsApp. So I'll see you in the next webinar.